My name's Evan from the Lonely Stoner podcast, and I'm back after a long hiatus. Seth's been carrying the channel on his back for a good while now, but after my hiatus and the many journeys and adventures I've had, I'm back with some content, and what better to make a video about the UFC? Probably the thing I pay the most attention to in the world, top to bottom. I try to know about as much of it as I can. And in terms of outside the UFC, not too much, but what we're here to do right now is I'm rating every number one contender's chances at beating the current champion of the division. And in some cases, the guy who is actually ranked number one isn't the guy who I'm going to be classing as the number one contender. But without further ado, we'll start with flyweight. And Joshua Van is fighting Tatsuro Taira, who is, the number one contender right now. Pantoja's out with an injury, and Tatsuro Taira is stepping up to fight Joshua Van, who of course beat Pantoja by that arm injury. I do give some credit to Joshua Van for doing that. It was a lot of luck, of course. Something like that doesn't happen often, so you can't say it's without luck, but at the same time, it was a push by Van that caused it. But if we look at Tatsuro Taira's last couple of fights, of course, lost that decision to Brandon Royval, competitive fight, beat Parker. Can't remember really this one, but I do remember him beating Brandon Moreno, which was a very, very good win, and showed off his grappling a lot, which I think he can use against Joshua Van. I think that's really his advantage in the fight. Of course, Joshua Van is a proper scrapper on the feet. He stays in there the whole time. You've got power in both hands. But he's not been in this game for a long time. And I think Tatsuro Taira has a sort of grappling pedigree that Joshua Van is going to have problems with. And of course, we've seen Joshua Van get knocked out by Charles Johnson before, but Charles Johnson and Tatsuro Taira are very different sort of fighters. Tatsuro Taira, he's quick on the feet, he mixes it up, but he has a good Japanese wrestling behind him, which a lot of people don't rate the Japanese wrestling too much. But I think, matchup wise, against a guy like Joshua Van, who really hasn't been training martial arts for that long at all, I think Tatsuro Taira can mix it up and have a lot of success against Joshua Van. Now, I'm not making an official prediction just yet, but in terms of his chance to beat, the chances I give him out of 10 to beat Joshua Van, who is a very good fighter, who I rate, very young too. I'm going to give him a 65% chance. I think he's going to win. I do think Tatsuro Taira is going to win. I think we're going to see this title be a hot potato. But, it's not a 70% confident pick, because I think Joshua Van's very good, and I think he has X factor about him, power. So, yeah, but if you want to talk about Pantoja, I do think Pantoja beats Van in a rematch. I think if the fight actually played out, then Pantoja would have implemented his grappling, would have taken the back once or twice, and would have definitely held it up on the feet as well. Pantoja's a savage. One of the best pound for pound right now. Of course, his last fight sort of, shows that you're only as good as your last fight. Something like that happens, even though, as unfortunate as it is, people aren't really talking about Pantoja. People are forgetting about him already. So, but that's my chances for Taira to beat Van. Right now, I do think Taira does win. We'll move on to the bantamweight division. One of my fighters ever, Piotr Jan. Yeah, I love this guy, man. When he was beating Marab up, I was going crazy, bro. It was an absolute perfect performance against Marab, and I think it showed that genuinely 5-round Peter Yan is such a completely different fighter versus 3-round Peter Yan. And of course, when you see something like that, similar to the Pereira and Kalaev second fight, where someone says they're injured in the first fight, you go, yeah, okay. Then they have a rematch and they absolutely smoke them. And then you sort of go, wow, maybe they were injured. And that's what I think about it, to be honest. I think Piotr Jan is a perfect fighter at 135. And now he got the title, I don't see anybody here beating him. But if we're talking about number one contender, Of course, Piotr Jan's not booked, and it's not clear whether he might fight Merab or Umar next. I can't remember if Umar's booked or not, but I know Sean O'Malley's booked. Obviously, Corey won't get it, and then all these guys won't get it. So maybe they're waiting for O'Malley to beat Zahabi and then give O'Malley the shot versus Jan. But I'm going to go with Merab here, seeing as he's the number one contender and there's no fight booked. I think Piotr Jan will have a similar performance in the third fight. If anything, he might even put it on Merab even more and finish him. I think he's sort of got the game plan to beat him now. I think he showed he has the grappling to stop Merab, and maybe it could be a thing where Merab strayed from his guaranteed winning game plan a little bit because he got a little bit more ego about him. He thinks he can strike. He hurt Corey Sandhagen on the feet. He's had some success on the feet in his last few fights, but that's the way it goes. It always saw ifs and buts. Anyone could have done anything differently. But I would give Piotr Jan a 75% chance of winning the rematch against Merab. I'll still give Merab a 25% chance because at the end of the day, he has the ability to go there 4-5 rounds, do absolutely nothing but shoot takedowns, and potentially win a fight that way. And there's not really much Piotr Jan would be able to do about it. But 75% chance for Piotr Jan to win. I love him. I think he's amazing. The dynamic game, body kicks, the boxing, the footwork, the movement. I think he's way too good for anyone in this division. And in a 5-round fight, I think he destroys everybody here at 135. But we'll move on to featherweight. Alexander Volkanovski, number one contender clearly. Movsar Evloev after his win versus Lerone Murphy, which I thought should have been a draw, to be honest. I thought the first 2 rounds were for Lerone. The third round, 4th round and 5th round were for Movsar, but of course in the 3rd round there was a point taken away. So should have been a draw in my opinion. But they gave Movsar the win, which surprised me a little bit, to be honest. In England, I think they could have given it to Lerone and gotten away with it, especially with the point deduction. But that's the way it goes. I mean, it's one of them ones, right? Because it was strange watching it because Movsar was refusing to grapple in the first couple of rounds. And then in the last 3 rounds, he started mixing in the grappling a bit and having more success, and Lerone Murphy tired out a bit more, and Movsar started taking over the fight. Even though the first 2 rounds were competitive on the feet as well, Lerone Murphy didn't beat up on Movsar. They were competitive rounds, which I think Lerone Murphy got the edge of. But that being said, I think Movsar did prove to be the better fighter. Overall, I do think Movsar is the better fighter, and the round basis and the way a fight is scored cannot necessarily provide the same narratives that watching it with your own eyes can provide. Because even though I think by the books it should have been a draw, I still think Movsar came out of it looking like the better fighter and gaining more from it. But he won nonetheless. Clear fight now for Volkanovski. I think Volkanovski wins. I think if you haven't got that super finishing potential, then you're not gonna beat him. I mean, we saw Brian Ortega have him in one of the tightest chokes you're gonna ever see anyone have anyone in, and Volkanovski was able to get out of that. I think Movsar will provide some competitiveness in the grappling for sure, because that is the game at the end of the day. That chain wrestling, you saw it exactly against Aljamain Sterling. Chain wrestling, taking the back, getting dominant positions, landing a bit of ground and pound here and there. He's not a boring fighter, Movsar, and he's not from Dagestan, I believe. I think he's from somewhere close to Dagestan. I'm not sure if it would say it here, but I don't think so. But no, I like Movsar. I think he's good. I think he's decently fun to watch. I think it'll be a good fight to watch against Volk. But I think Volk will be able to nullify a lot of the grappling. I think he's got that base about him. I think he's been in this game long enough. He's experienced enough. I think he's seen pretty much everything you're going to see. He's fought Makhachev twice, fought Aldo, fought Max Holloway. I mean, of course, those are different fighters to Movsar Evloev, but I think Volkanovski's got this one in the bag. I think he'll be able to keep it on the feet enough where he'll be able to implement his speed, his low kicks, his jabs, and I think he'll eventually take over the fight and potentially finish Movsar Evloev. But at this point in Volkanovski's career, I think he would more just coast to a dominant decision, 4-1, 5-0, you know, something of the sort. I do think Volkanovski can have his own success in the grappling too, mind you. I think he can potentially stuff a couple of takedowns, get Movsar in to a couple of positions. Because I don't think Movsar, although he's very, very, built and very, very defined, doesn't look that strong against guys. He gets guys in dominant positions with really good takedowns. I mean, I think it was called X sweep he did against Laura Murphy was just unbelievable. Just the sort of stuff he's able to do. And I'm not being one of those like, oh my god, the cage control, man. The cage control is so impressive. Like John Anik, little bum ass saying, if Holloway versus Charles isn't exciting, I don't know what is. Like, what? I'm not one of them guys in it, but what Movsar does do on the ground is genuinely impressive. However, I think Volkanovski will be able to implement his game plan. It might have a little bit of trouble early with Movsar, spamming the grappling, but I watched Volkanovski's video pretty much saying it would be taking the piss if he didn't fight Movsar next, so that is the only fight. Now we'll go to lightweight, of course. Ilia Topuria is fighting the number 1 interim champion Justin Gaethje. I don't need to say much about this. Ilia's going to smoke the fuck out of him in the first round. Maybe Justin can crafty, low kicks, weird head movement his way into the second or third round, but I genuinely do not see that happening. I think he's going to fight how he always fights in these big title fights, which is just work as hard as you can to get finished by your opponent, unfortunately, which is what Justin Gaethje does in these type of fights. Go as hard as you can to get finished, and you're going to get finished, but you're going to get slimed out by Topuria very quickly. Now we'll move on. Islam Makhachev. Jack Della's still number 1. Well, obviously it's not going to be him because he's fighting Carlos Prates, but we'll go Ian Machado Gary because I think he should fight for the title next. If we look at his last couple of wins, of course, beat Belal by a clear unanimous decision. It wasn't a barn burner or he didn't dominate him or anything like that, but he clearly won, used the range, was able to outstrike him. It was pretty easy. Fight before that was, of course, against Carlos Prates, who went and knocked out Jeff Neal and Leon Edwards. Well, of course, that win has aged incredibly. But, of course, he did win that fight 4-1. Had a lot of trouble in that 5th round, but, it was almost not because of something Ian Gary did, because Prates actually decided to be aggressive and start going forward and try and land big shots on Ian Gary, which he wasn't really doing for the first 4 rounds. He was more trying to avoid the grappling, which he was still not doing. And then in 5th round, he sort of went, I'm losing, I might as well try and knock him out. And he did. And then, of course, before that, he lost to Shavkat. But that is almost irrelevant because it wasn't dominant by Shavkat. It was a very cagey fight. It wasn't fun to watch. It was a lot of clinching, a lot of knees in the clinch and stuff like that. And Shavkat is gone out the rankings and he disappeared. So it's unclear whether he'll even fight again. So that loss is almost evaporated. I don't really care about that. So in my opinion, having just beat Belal Muhammad and the Prates win having aged as well as it has, Ian Machado Gary should be next for the 170 title. And in terms of his chances against Islam Makhachev, I think a lot of people would underrate his chances against Islam because he's going to be the biggest guy Islam's ever fought by a fair bit. I mean, Ian Machado Gary is all of 6'3". I don't think he's, in terms of weight, I don't think he's the biggest 170 pounder because he's a thin guy. He's a bit of a wiry guy, and he built a bit weird. But he's gonna provide a lot of trouble in the striking for Islam and even in the grappling. I think because Ian Gary's quite a good grappler. However, he's not on Islam's level, and I do think that's where Islam is gonna really dominate this fight. And I'll probably give Islam like an 80% chance of winning. I think there could be a world in which Ian Gary is able to use his footwork to keep away from the grappling, keep his back off the cage, use knees, clinch elbows, dirty boxing, and stuff like that to keep the fight on the feet and outpoint Islam on the feet and win a decision. There is a world, I think, where that happens, but I think Islam's grappling is a bit too strong for anybody in this division, if you ask me. I think he would probably have most people in this division. So I'll give Islam 80. I'll give Ian Machado Gary a 20% chance of winning. Yeah, he would be a big underdog for me. Middleweight, of course, Hamzat is fighting Sean Strickland. Hamzat's going to smush Sean Strickland. Again, similar to lightweight, I don't really need to talk about this. I see a lot of people saying, Sean Strickland, he's going to provide a lot of problems, man. He's crafty. No, absolutely not. Hamzat's going to do... I could potentially even see Hamzat knocking him out on the feet, to be honest with you. So, yeah. Who knows? I mean, I'd love for Strickland to win, but Hamzat is going to smash him. Like 95% chance of winning. Light heavyweight, of course, we have got Alex Pereira's moving up to heavyweight. And when Yuri steps in the ring versus Olberg, or in the cage versus Olberg, then Alex Pereira is going to be stripped, and that fight's going to be for the light heavyweight title. So this is a bit of a weird one. I don't really know how to, I guess I'll just talk about Yuri Olberg. I think Yuri's going to win. I think it's going to be a war, to be honest. I think it's going to go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. I think it's going to be a war. But I think Yuri's going to pull it out the fire, like we've seen him do before. Like against Khalil, like against Glover. I think we're going to see him pull it out the fire late in the fight. I think he's just he's too much of a warrior for a guy like Olberg to beat him. And if Olberg just knocks him out, then fair enough. Olberg is just this untouchable light heavyweight he's just a Francis Ngannou of light heavyweight. But the way he beat Yan, I think Yuri would probably put a pretty bad beating on Yan if they fought. So I'm going to go with Yuri. Of course, I don't take these Alex Pereira knockouts as in like, oh, he's cooked, or look what Pereira did to him, Olberg can do this, because Pereira is, he's something of his own at light heavyweight, and like I was talking about with the Piotr Yan rematch with Merab, I believe him that he was injured against Magomed in the first fight, and because he actually just smoked him in the second fight. So I'll give Yuri a 70% chance of winning. I think Olberg has power enough to give him trouble, and I think he'll use low kicks. Olberg will use low kicks early to frustrate Yuri too. So I think it's going to be cagey in the first few rounds, and I think they're going to go to war, and then Yuri's going to put it out of the fire. And now we'll move on to heavyweight. Tom Aspinall, of course. Of course. Tom Aspinall out right now. He's injured with his eye thing. Cyril Gane poked the shit out of him. So, how do we do this one? Do we judge Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane, or do we judge Gane versus Pereira? I mean, I guess we'll do Gane versus Pereira first, and then the winner of that versus Aspinall. Okay, so Gane versus Pereira. I think Pereira's going to slam him out. I think Gane has enough movement and dynamic kicking and punching to provide some problems for Pereira. I think Pereira might be a little bit hesitant at the start. It's heavyweight. He's fighting a big dude in Cyril Gane. But I can see Pereira easing into the fight, 1st or 2nd round, low kicks, feints, couple of left hooks. And I think as it builds in, late third round, I think Pereira's going to take over. He's going to start really putting it on Gane. And I think he's going to win the unanimous decision. Or late TKO. Because it really depends on whether Gane sort of folds up in those big moments, like we've seen him against Francis Ngannou, where he just gave away dominant positions for submissions that were never on, and ended up losing the fight, and against John Jones, where he just crumbled into a ball and he got submitted. So if that happens, then Pereira really could put it on him badly and finish the fight. But if Gane really tries hard to win the whole time, then I could see Pereira winning a unanimous decision, 3-2, 4-1. I think Gane will provide some problems because he's big enough, he's long enough, he's dynamic enough. And, he's given a lot. I do think he lost against Volkov. So that's why, what I've seen from him, I can't know that and pick against Pereira, to be honest. But I'll give Pereira like a 65% chance of winning. I still give Gane a good chance, but it's a whole new challenge for Alex Pereira, and you don't really know what's going to happen. But yeah, man, that's probably my most anticipated fight in the UFC right now, is Alex Pereira versus Cyril Gane. And of course, we'll then likely have Alex Pereira versus Tom Aspinall, which I think Tom Aspinall will take the easy route to winning. I think he'll take him down and submit him relatively quickly. Maybe they'll have an exchange or two on the feet. Aspinall might eat a couple of low kicks and get caught with a couple of check hooks that he doesn't like. Because I think if it stayed on the feet, then it really depends on who catches who first. That's not going to go too long. Because Aspinall is going to be going in. Pereira is going to be looking for his counters and using his feints. So I really think that depends. If it stays on the feet, it's going to just depend on who lands on who first. But obviously, including the ground game, I think Aspinall is a bit too big, a bit too strong, a bit too dominant in that, for Alex Pereira. And I think he would take him down and submit him in the first round. And what do I give Pereira's chances against Aspinall? Probably I'll give him a 25% chance of beating Tom Aspinall. And it's all down to matchups, of course, because Cyril Gane could be giving problems to Aspinall, like he did in their fight. But Pereira could smoke Gane, but then get smoked by Aspinall, even though Gane was potentially getting the better of Aspinall. But if we want to talk about Aspinall versus Gane, this is like a 60-40 to Aspinall, in my opinion. Before that first fight, it was like a 75-25, 80-20. But Gane showed to be a little bit more proactive in defending grappling, and, the eye pokes were terrible. But if you want to just take out the eye pokes, he bloodied up Tom a little bit. He looked like, he was frustrating him out there. But of course, that was only like 4 minutes of fighting. And of course, I'm not talking about the women. So that's the chance I give every current number one contender to beat the champion. I've been Evan from the Lonely Stoner podcast. Peace.